Friends, after confessing last week to my general avoidance of literature proclaiming a prescribed number of dictates for better life, for happiness, wealth, fitness, whatever, you may find today's sermon title an odd choice. Moreover, if you know anything about the Ten Commandments or the ancient Hebrews wandering in the desert when they gave them, or Charlton Heston, or what happens just after Moses descends with these graven tablets, you might find happy living an even odder description of the result. To be clear, these famous 10 commandments are not meant for happiness. They're meant for obedience. Obedience first to God and then to each other. The effect of such obedience may indeed be some sort of happiness, but contemporary culture doesn't like to think about rules or restrictions bringing happiness. We tend to think of rules and restrictions as limitations to freedom, to personal choice and expression, and to the right of each of us to define who we are, how we want to live, and how others may interact with us. On the other hand, there's little here in these Big Ten that is controversial to the God-fearing, law-abiding, faithful woman or man. The Ten Commandments have been the basis of most secular law and society for millennia. Just don't make that connection too publicly, or think of putting depictions of the tablets too close to courthouses that tend to uphold very similar statutes. Modern people that we are, we tend to think of society as being regulated by and subject to human law, and we hold the separation of church and state to be very sacred indeed. Now, by all accounts, 2020 is turning out to be the year when it's best not to ask, what could possibly go wrong next? This is not the year to think the worst is over, and I submit to you that only 4 days into the fourth quarter, this final lap around the track may feel like the longest yet. We're tired. We're COVID tired, Zoom fatigued. Many of us can't breathe and can't stop weeping. Racism has worn us out again. Politics and pundits have us turning backs in disgust while looking over our shoulders to make sure it's not getting worse. Online learning is hard for students and harder for parents. Masks are uncomfortable, but a small price to pay. How do I find a job in this climate? Can you believe I have to look for a new apartment in this time? How do I even get started? It's got to get better from here. We say the worst is surely behind us. Maybe, hopefully. Let's keep working and not stop believing. Blue folks and red folks have different stories to tell about how we got here. Blue folks and red folks have both forgotten that we're all folks, and some of us, namely black folks and brown folks, do need more of our attention than some other folks if we're going to get to a world where all are equal. Blue folks and red folks, who would have guessed we'd come to such a division? We quarrel down here in the valleys of our despair. We can't speak to one another. We fly flags and we make slogans to intimidate one another. Diplomacy and dialogue, ideas and debate, relics. Relics of a time not this time. We wander in a desert, and so many of us have forgotten how society should work, how civilizations are dreamed up, simply how to listen to our better angels. We have no idea what's happening anymore. We know a thing or two about these ancient Hebrews who were left to their own devices, their own vices, in the valley of Mount Sinai. We can imagine a thing or two about how they felt, what they needed, how the world was too much, and how fears come so close to overpowering hope. We know this division, the splitting of a singular vision into fractions, each of us, red folks and blue folks, Hebrew folks and modern folks, think we have the answer to. 1 month from today, we will be waking up with much of the uncertainty we have today. In BC, which is to say before COVID time, we would ordinarily expect to be waking up the day after a national election to newspaper headlines, morning edition segments, and television reports of the results of a presidential election and the unheeded progress of democracy. a land of freedom for all. This is unlikely in our current climate. While hopefully most, if not all of us, will have voted by November 3rd, the results of that tally are unlikely for days, hopefully just days, hopefully before a Sunday after the election. Red folks and blue folks have different ideas about what we'll do in those liminal days between election voting and election results. Some folks worry about the fabric of democracy, an ancient rug seemingly more threadbare than ever these days. That rug beneath our feet that threatens to fall, to fail, a safety net with holes. Some folks are planning their own ways to safeguard our democracy by choosing their side, by upholding their side's laws. And some leaders are sowing this discord and riling up their people, while other leaders are sowing hope and promise with a heavy dose of caution. It's hard to know to whom to listen to. It's hard to listen to anybody when everyone talks over each other. Blue folks and red folks, we know a thing about discord. We know a thing about valley times. We know a thing about wildernesses. And whether you're a red folk or a blue folk, today we're West End folk, at least for now. And all days we are God's folk. And here in our tent, in our place of dwelling together for these wilderness days, we have a few values of our own, a few statutes that we believe will help guide our happier lives. The famous 10 Commandments upon which so many of our ordinances, laws, guidelines, and prohibitions are based are notable for many reasons, two of which I'd like us all to leave here today having firmly in mind. The first is that these are spoken by God, spoken to and for us, which is to say they are not our commandments, they are God's commandments. We can neither ratify nor reject them. This is not a democracy. God, the loving parent, did not ask us what we needed or what we wanted. God gave us God's commandments. God spoke these 10 verses to Moses, and Moses brought them to the people. There was to be no debate, thank God for that, and these were not open for discussion. The first thing about the commandments to know is that they are God's for God's people. No wisdom, not before nor ever since, has written these 10 lines in quite the same way. The second thing to know about the commandments today is that they pertain to two parties, and all of them are about relationships. These commandments are relational, each of them. And in each of the 10 commandments, there is an I and a thou, an I and an other. The first 3 commandments are about how God needs to be treated by God's people. God starts with God's self and makes I statements. I am God. I will not tolerate idols. Do not use my name in anger. As a modern day preacher, I wish God would have also included a statement about God's preferred pronouns, but that seems to be up to our own imaginations. These are God's governing laws for how we should treat God. And they're simple enough. God is God, which is to say we are not. God should come first among all things we do in a day. And don't try to make God into some other idol, a golden calf, an email inbox, your own body, a bank account, or a political mantra. Don't put any of those things before God. And for the sake of God, do not use God's name as an expression of your own anger or frustration, not when the name of God is the name of love. These are 3 statutes for our relationship to God, and they're all pretty straightforward. 2 things to remember about the commandments today. 1, they are God's, not human, and 2, they express relationship. 3 of the commandments, the first 3, provide ground rules for our relationship with God, how God will and will not let people treat the divine. The next 7, the vast majority, are about our relationships with ourselves, with our family, and with our community. Take time off each week. That's number 4. And it's about our relationship with ourself and maintaining good self-care. It's also a good corollary to number 2 as we try to tear down the idols of overworking, of too many meetings, of capitalism, perfectionism, busyness, etc. And those idols that demand 7 days of work each week, while our God only wants 6 at most. Honor thy father and mother. Seemingly easy, every parent's dream, but difficult for many whose father or mother, human beings that they all are not exactly honorable. Best to remember that often a good way to honor is to let go. Let go of childhood ideas or fantasies and accept realities and limits, even when that means honoring is letting go. Now, the back 5 of the 10 Commandments are all dictates for communal engagement. Don't murder or commit adultery or steal or lie or be jealous. These are straightforward too, though hard to follow for some. Taken together, these 10 Commandments about our relationship to God, to self, and to other are God's decree for how we will live happier, more faithful lives. And God and Moses, they hammer these things out together up on Mount Sinai while the ancient Hebrews are hammering out their gold down below. And Moses comes down from the mountain, sees what the people have been up to, and loses his temper. Understandable. The people beg him not to let God talk to them directly, when Moses has been up on the mountain doing nothing but speaking directly to God, all by himself for days on end. God speaks to Moses, and Moses listens and records and works out how to convey these messages to God's people. All the while, God's people in the valley are figuring out their own ways of being, ways very far from what God has in mind. How much worse could it get, they wonder? And here in the wilderness, our leader has climbed the mountain and left us. We have no home nor hope. We don't have any hope. We're lost. What could possibly go wrong next? What could possibly go wrong next? Such a question for such valley wilderness times like then and now. In 1 month, we'll awake with the decision of who will lead us cast but not known. Life between here and there is unknown and also sure that it will pass, sure that we are God's, even while all earthly cares remain a matter of the unknown. What will we do between now and then? How will you, beloved, take care of yourself and of your community and of your relationship with the holy? Are there commandments you might live into 2 or 10 or 20? Don't have 20. Stick closer to 2. What do you need for this race that is long and uncertain? No golden calf will do the trick. No other gods before our God will do any good. Do not lie or swear falsely against your debater. Do not be unfaithful. Do not murder. Try too not to kill hope or faith. Jealousy will get you nowhere, and the Joneses really don't need to be kept up with anyway. And pay attention to your family, given and chosen, and find your honor in honoring in your own way. Remember that God is God and we are not. All other ground is sinking sand. Happy living feels so far away from what 2020 has brought us to date. Happy living? Not here, not now, said the ancient Hebrews in the valley. Heavens, no, says God. Here are 10 simple suggestions. All right, make them commandments that I commend to you. Commendments to help restore the decency and the hope, the faith and the justice, the simplicity of life where all have enough and where each is valued for all that they are. A life of happiness that God has in mind for God's people, people God plants in gardens and paradises and wonderful places where justice prevails. We remember that God's mind is much bigger than our own. Perhaps this is a time to put God first above all things, of all things. God's time is vaster than ours. God's love greater than any power in heaven or on earth. It is for you. It is for your care. It is for the sustenance of this day, a day that God has made for you, for all of you. To you, I commend these 10 things, ideas for living, suggestions for happiness, ideas of God, gifts for God's people. Amen.